Look, I've been attending the Galactic Military Academy for 3 cycles now, and I've learned one universal truth that applies to every species across 47 star systems. Instructors love being right. They live for it. They dream about it. And Instructor Krelvin? He was the absolute king of being right. Krelvin was a Zentari, which meant he had 4 arms, purple skin that shifted to orange when he got excited, and an ego roughly the size of a small moon. He'd been teaching weapons and combat theory for 20 standard years, and he had this way of strutting into the lecture hall like he personally invented warfare. His lower arms would rest on his belt while his upper arms gestured dramatically, and his voice had this booming quality that made even the most boring tactical analysis sound like an epic poem. The guy was a legend, honestly. Decorated veteran, master of 17 different weapon systems, and holder of the Academy record for fastest plasma rifle disassembly. Every cadet respected him. Most feared him a little, and absolutely nobody contradicted him in class. Well, nobody except Jake Torres. Jake was human, which already made him weird by galactic standards. Humans had only joined the coalition 15 years ago, and most species still thought of them as the galaxy's over-enthusiastic puppies. Cute, kind of dangerous if startled, and possessing bizarre habits that nobody quite understood. Jake embodied all of that and more. He sat in the 3rd row of Modern Warfare 101, right next to me, and he always had this beat-up sword strapped to his back. Not a vibroblade, not a plasma-edged cutter. An actual, honest-to-stars, forged metal sword. The kind of thing you'd see in a museum exhibit titled Primitive Killing Implements, a retrospective. Most cadets figured it was some kind of emotional support object. Humans were sentimental like that. They had no idea what was coming. The day everything went sideways started like any other class. Krelvin swept into the hall, his teaching robes flowing behind him, and immediately launched into his favorite subject, the obsolescence of melee combat. "Cadets," he announced, his upper arms spreading wide like he was embracing the entire room. "Today we discuss the evolution of warfare, and why certain primitive methodologies have been rightfully abandoned by every civilized species in the galaxy." He pulled up a holographic display showing various weapons. Throughout history, clubs, spears, axes, and yes, swords. They rotated slowly in the air, looking ancient and sad. 3,000 years ago, the last major military force abandoned bladed weapons in favor of directed energy systems. Do you know why? He paused for dramatic effect, his skin shifting to a proud amber. Because bringing a knife to a plasma fight is not tactics, it is suicide with extra steps. A few cadets chuckled. "I'll admit, I smirked too. It was a good line." Krelvin continued, pulling up footage of modern plasma rifles, railguns, and photon disruptors in action. Range, power, precision. These are the tools of the modern warrior. Melee weapons belong in museums, not on battlefields. They represent the savage infancy of warfare, before intelligence prevailed over brute force. That's when Jake's hand went up. Krelvin noticed but kept talking, probably hoping Jake would get bored and lower it. He didn't. The human just sat there, hand raised, with this little smile on his face that I'd learned meant trouble. Finally, Krelvin sighed. "Yes, Cadet Torres, you have a question about basic tactical reality?" "More of a comment, actually," Jake said, standing up. His tone was polite, almost friendly, which somehow made it worse. "I think you might be oversimplifying the tactical utility of melee weapons in modern combat scenarios." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a Grexian moth sneeze. Krelvin's skin went from amber to a dangerous crimson. All 4 of his arms crossed over his chest. "Oversimplifying. You believe I, a decorated combat veteran with 2 decades of teaching experience, am oversimplifying warfare?" "A little bit, yeah," Jake said, and I swear half the class gasped. "Enlighten us then, Cadet Torres. Please explain how your primitive blade," Krelvin gestured dismissively at the sword on Jake's back, "would fare against, say, a standard-issue plasma rifle at 50 meters. Jake's smile widened. "How about I show you instead?" Krelvin's 4 eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought he might actually throw Jake out of class. But then his skin shifted to a curious yellow, and that predatory instructor grin spread across his face. The one that meant someone was about to learn a very painful lesson. A demonstration. How delightful. He gestured toward the combat simulation area at the back of the lecture hall. "By all means, Cadet Torres. Let us see this miraculous melee superiority you propose." The entire class scrambled out of their seats. This was better than any lecture. This was entertainment. Jake calmly stood up, unstrapping the sword from his back as he walked down the aisle. Other cadets whispered and pointed. A few pulled out their data pads to record. "I'll make this educational," Krelvin announced, following Jake to the simulation area. Standard automated turret drill. 3 plasma cannons. Randomized firing patterns. Academy cadets train with energy shields and are expected to dodge or find cover to survive 10 seconds. He looked at Jake with undisguised amusement. "You, of course, will have neither shields nor cover. Just your antique." "Sounds fair," Jake said, rolling his shoulders. That's when the betting started. I watched a Vrelian cadet offer 3-to-1 odds against Jake, lasting 5 seconds. A Korthan in the front row bet his entire meal credits for the week that the human wouldn't even make it to 3. The only people not betting were the other 2 humans in class, Riley and Chen, who just leaned back with knowing smirks. I should have recognized that as a warning sign. Jake stepped into the designated combat zone, a marked circle about 15 meters across. He drew his sword, and I got my first good look at it. The blade was about a meter long, slightly curved, with strange markings etched into the metal. It looked old, well used, but maintained with obvious care. Light reflected off the edge in a way that suggested it was incredibly sharp. "That's a family heirloom," Jake said, noticing everyone staring. "My great-great-grandfather carried it in something called the Marine Corps. We've got this weird human thing where we refuse to let traditions die, even when they're tactically questionable." Krelvin activated the turrets. 3 sleek plasma cannons rose from the floor, their targeting sensors whirring to life. Red aiming lasers painted dots across Jake's chest. "Standard drill protocol," Krelvin explained to the class, his teaching instincts kicking in despite his obvious anticipation of Jake's failure. "These turrets fire level 4 plasma bolts. Non-lethal at training intensity, but you'll feel it if they connect. They're programmed for unpredictability. Even our best cadets struggle with this drill." He turned to Jake. "Last chance to reconsider, Cadet Torres. I'll allow you to withdraw without penalty." "Appreciate it, sir," Jake said, settling into a stance that looked relaxed but somehow coiled, like a spring waiting to release. "But I'm good. Actually, just to make this interesting, I'm not going to dodge." Krelvin blinked. "You're not going to dodge?" "Nope. You're going to stand there and let plasma bolts hit you." "Not exactly," Jake said, and his grin turned absolutely feral. "I'm going to hit them back." Before Krelvin could process that statement, he activated the drill. The targeting lasers disappeared. For one heartbeat, everything was still. Then all 3 turrets fired at once. The first plasma bolt screamed toward Jake's center mass at a speed that should have made response impossible. Every cadet in that room had done this drill. We knew you had maybe a quarter second to react once the laser disappeared. Most of us dove, rolled, or desperately threw up our shields. Jake's sword moved. It wasn't a wild swing or a desperate block. It was precise, economical, almost casual. The blade intercepted the plasma bolt at an angle, and instead of exploding on contact, the bolt deflected upward, splashing harmlessly against the ceiling shields in a spray of dissipating energy. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Krelvin's mouth fell open. "Lucky hit," someone muttered, but they didn't sound convinced. The second turret fired, this time from Jake's left side. A different angle, faster targeting, meant to catch him while he recovered from the first deflection. Except Jake wasn't recovering. He was already moving, spinning with his blade low. And when the sword connected with the second bolt, he didn't just deflect it. He redirected it with purpose. The plasma bolt shot across the room and slammed directly into one of the training dummies lined up against the wall. The dummy's chest plate exploded in a shower of sparks and melted composite material. "Oh, that was definitely on purpose," Riley called out from the crowd, and I heard Chen laughing. Krelvin's skin had gone completely white, which for a Zentari meant absolute shock. All 4 of his arms hung limp at his sides. The third turret, apparently deciding to end this embarrassment, fired 3 bolts in rapid succession, a burst pattern designed to overwhelm even shielded opponents. Jake didn't even look worried. He stepped forward into the attack, and his sword became a blur of motion. The first bolt deflected left, the second deflected right. The third, and this is the part I still can't fully explain, he actually swatted straight back at the turret it came from. The bolt hit the turret's housing with a metallic clang, and the whole thing sparked, fizzled, and shut down. Jake had just destroyed a plasma turret with its own ammunition, using a sword that by all rights should have melted the moment it touched coherent plasma energy. The entire class lost their collective minds. Cadets were shouting, jumping out of their seats, and demanding instant replays on their data pads. The Vrelian who'd offered 3-to-1 odds looked like he might cry. The Korthan who'd bet his meal credits was frantically checking if there was a rule against humans violating physics. Jake just stood there in the combat circle, sword resting casually on his shoulder, not even breathing hard. He looked at Krelvin with that same polite smile and said, "So, about melee weapons being obsolete. You wanted to repeat that, sir?" Krelvin tried to speak, failed. Tried again. His skin was cycling through colors so fast he looked like a malfunctioning disco ball. Finally, he managed, "How? How is that possible? The heat distribution alone should have. The reaction time required. That's not. You can't just what, sir?" Jake asked innocently. "Deflect plasma bolts with a metal sword." Krelvin's voice cracked on the last word. "Oh," Jake said, examining his blade like he just noticed it was there. "See? That's the thing about humans. We've got these really weird evolutionary quirks. Ridiculous hand-eye coordination, pattern recognition that borders on precognition when we're focused, and these reflexes that kicked in back when we had to dodge things that wanted to eat us." He shrugged. "Plus, we practice. A lot. Humans are super stubborn about keeping skills alive even after they're supposedly useless." He walked over to the still sparking turret he'd destroyed and tapped it with his sword. "Also, this blade's edge is molecularly aligned carbon nanotube composite folded into traditional steel. My dad's a materials engineer and a history nerd. It can handle some heat." The silence that followed was deafening. Krelvin finally found his voice, though it came out about an octave higher than usual. "You're telling me that humanity has maintained ancient combat techniques into the space age and somehow weaponized nostalgia into a viable tactical system?" "When you say it like that, it sounds weird," Jake admitted, sheathing his sword. "But yeah, basically. We brought horses to space stations. We still practice archery for fun. There are humans who can throw knives with accuracy that makes targeting computers jealous. We've got martial arts traditions that are thousands of years old, and people still train in them every single day." He grinned. "We're sentimental idiots who refuse to let go of anything, and sometimes that actually works out." A cadet in the back, a Throlian named Ven, raised a tentacle. "But the math doesn't work. The cognitive processing required to track a plasma bolt's trajectory and calculate the exact angle and timing for deflection should exceed organic capability." "Should, yeah," Jake agreed. "Except human brains do this thing where we don't actually calculate, we just kind of feel it. Pattern recognition on a subconscious level. You see enough attacks, practice enough responses, and eventually your body just knows what to do before your conscious mind catches up." He pointed at Krelvin. "Sir, you've been in combat. You ever make a shot you couldn't explain? Where you just knew where the target would be?" Krelvin's skin flickered orange, a sign of reluctant understanding. Battle instinct. Warrior's intuition. Every veteran experiences it. Right. Now imagine an entire species that's been sharpening that instinct with dedicated practice for thousands of years, across dozens of different weapon systems and combat styles, and never actually stopped even when we invented guns and missiles and plasma rifles. Jake's expression turned slightly manic. "We kept all of it, sir. Every technique, every tradition, every ridiculous way humans figured out how to hurt each other. And then we brought all of that accumulated knowledge into space with us." I watched Krelvin try to process this. His forearms moved independently, gesturing at nothing, as if physically grasping for rationalization. "This is absurd. By every tactical doctrine, every strategic analysis, melee combat in a modern warfare context is suicide." "Usually, yeah," Jake conceded. "I'm not saying everyone should throw away their plasma rifles and charge with swords. That would be stupid. I'm just saying that maybe, possibly, there are niche situations where having someone who can do this," he gestured at the destroyed turret, "might be useful. Close quarters. Ambush scenarios. Situations where ranged weapons are compromised." Chen stood up from where she'd been watching. "Also, it's really intimidating. Imagine you're in a firefight and someone deflects your plasma shots with a sword and then sprints at you screaming. The psychological warfare value alone is worth considering." "Humans are terrifying," muttered a Crixian cadet, and several others nodded in agreement. Krelvin's skin settled into a thoughtful purple. His instructor brain was clearly wrestling with his veteran brain, and I could see the exact moment tactical pragmatism won. "You would be willing to teach this technique?" "Sure," Jake said. "Fair warning, though. It takes years of practice, and not every species has the same reflexes humans do. But the principles, those can translate. Timing, prediction, understanding energy dynamics. That's universal." "I'm in," Ven announced immediately. "If a human can make ancient weapons viable, I want to understand how." A dozen other cadets echoed the sentiment. Even the ones who'd lost bets looked intrigued now that the initial shock had worn off. Krelvin stood there, all four arms crossed, staring at Jake with an expression that mixed exasperation, respect, and the dawning horror of realizing he'd have to update his curriculum. You humans are going to get it. Completely destroy my lesson plans, aren't you? Probably, sir, Jake said cheerfully. But hey, look at it this way. Now you get to teach something nobody else in the galaxy is teaching. That's pretty cool. So here's where we are now, 2 months later. The Galactic Military Academy officially offers Adaptive Close Quarters Combat, Historical Techniques in Modern Warfare, as an elective course. Jake teaches it twice a week, and there's a waiting list 3 semesters long. Turns out everyone wants to learn how to be a space-age sword fighter once they see it's actually possible. Jake's become this weird micro-celebrity on campus. Cadets from species I didn't even know existed stop him in the corridors asking for demonstrations. He's been featured in 3 different tactical journals with titles like Reassessing Primitive Methodology and Why Your Doctrine Might Be Wrong. A Human Perspective. The coalition military is quietly investigating whether other obsolete human techniques might have modern applications. Riley started a betting pool on which instructor Jake will horrify next. My money's on the stealth tactics professor, because I've seen Jake practice something he calls parkour, and it violates several laws of physics and common sense. The best part, though? Krelvin decided he needed to understand this human insanity firsthand, so he joined Jake's class as a student. Watching a 4-armed Zentari weapons master try to learn sword fighting from a human 20 years his junior is peak comedy. Last week, Krelvin got tangled in his own arms during a basic kata and fell over. Jake, to his credit, kept a straight face and just said, "Good effort, sir. Try leading with your upper right next time." Krelvin's skin went through 6 colors in as many seconds. But here's the thing. Krelvin's actually getting decent. Not plasma bolt deflecting decent, but competent enough that he started integrating some of the principles into his regular weapons courses. Turns out when you stop insisting you know everything, you learn pretty fast. Yesterday, I passed Krelvin's office and heard him in there talking to another instructor. "You cannot judge human capabilities by standard metrics," he was saying. "They are tactically irrational, and somehow that makes them more dangerous, not less. Treat every human assumption as potentially valid until proven otherwise, because they will prove you wrong in the most spectacular way possible." That's probably going in my species description essay for xenopsychology class. This morning, Jake walked into Modern Warfare 101 with his sword strapped to his back like always. Krelvin looked up from his lecture notes, made eye contact, and said, "Melee weapons occupy a specialized but valid role in comprehensive tactical planning when wielded by appropriately trained personnel." Jake grinned. "Want to repeat that a little louder, sir?" Krelvin's skin flashed crimson, but he was smiling. "Sit down, Cadet Torres, before I make you demonstrate against 5 turrets instead of 3. "You promise?" Jake asked, way too eagerly. And that's the thing about humans. They don't just refuse to let old things die. They find ways to make those old things relevant again, usually by doing something that should be impossible and then acting like it's no big deal. They'll bring swords to plasma fights, horses to space stations, and probably wooden sailing ships to naval academies in zero gravity, and somehow, impossibly, make it work. Never, ever tell a human something is obsolete. They'll take it as a challenge, prove you wrong, and then offer to teach a seminar about it. Trust me on this one. I've seen it happen, and I've got front row seats for whatever ridiculous thing they're going to do next.